So I think we can start with the second panel. All speakers are here, and which is also very important, the moderator is here. So I will be quiet in some seconds and hand over to the moderator, Teodora Ladic. Welcome, great that you supported us. I had to ask her yesterday if she could take over a panel to moderate it because another moderator could not do it. Thank you very much. Teodora is working for the Pan-European movement in Montenegro, which is also a partner in this project. So please take over.
Thank you, Mr. Klauček. It is my pleasure always to support pan-European activities and to be here with distinguished guests. It is my very honor to moderate it. So thank you again for the opportunity. And I would like to say that I have been following very thoroughly the previous panels, and I must say that I collected a lot of data and a lot of impressive thoughts on this particular topic, which is my currently area of research. So I was very interested to follow it, and I'm also very keen to introduce our dear panelists for this particular panel, which will focus on the aspects of migrations in terms of intercultural dialogue. This is very interesting perspective, as this particular project of Paneuropa Austria and Slovenia is dealing with diverse aspects of migration. So before I dive into the panel, I would just would like to give one contribution on the thoughts on the European identity. How do I see it? Maybe the best way is to give it in the one picturesque way. And that is if we can assume that whole Europe is one large cake, which could be very in line with the previous thoughts. And this cake represents identity of Europe. However, this cake has a lot of layers. And within these layers, there are a lot of ingredients. And these are all diverse cultures, values of these cultures that Europe has. And in order to sustain this big cake, all these ingredients and layers have to have very good intercommunication. And I believe that this is the European identity, and it is very important to nourish it, because this is our richness. As the very good proverb that European Union is based on in this particular aspect, and that is united in diversity, I believe that we can agree that European Union has recognized the importance of these particular topics. I wanted also to say something in French, but I will pass it because we heard a lot of good speakers, so I don't want to be so much confident. And then I will just introduce our panelists, which are we all waiting for. So first relevant expert in this particular topic is Mr. Marcello Maria Fracanzani from Italy, who is full professor of administrative law in the law faculty of Udine University. He was also director of the Institute of International des études européennes, Antonio Rosmini, in Bolzano or Bozen, from 2007 to 2016. He also, in 2018, was appointed as a permanent judge of the Supreme Court for outstanding merits. So welcome on the panel. The next panelist is His Excellency Prince Asfa-Wossen Asserate, who is Ethio-German best-selling author, economic consultant for African and Middle Eastern affairs and political analyst, and who has been living in Germany since the advent of the Ethiopian Revolution in early 70s. He is also a member of Imperial House of Ethiopia, as he is a great nephew of the last Ethiopian emperor, and also a great grandson of the Empress, as well as the son of the last president of the Imperial Crown Council. He founded Pactum Africanum, the Alliance for the Promotion of Abrahamic Dialogue in Africa 2013, and he done a lot of publications, awards, and hold honorary offices. Welcome also. And last but not least, Mr. Ali Mostfa, who is Associate Professor at Lyon Catholic University. He was also Vice Dean of International Relations. He's currently also a researcher at the Research Unit Confluence, a member of the Scientific Coordination Board platform of University Research on Islam in Europe. And he also, his research focuses on religious discourse and violence, religion and ethnicity, and Islam in the context of Western modernity. So I believe that we have very interesting panelists, and I will no further delay the discussion. Please, Mr. Fracanzani, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to our chairperson. And the souvenir, it's strong hearing from Montenegro, which relations are very strong between Venice and I'm proud I've knew His Excellency Anton Zbutega, that was former ambassador of the Holy See and nephew of your great grand poet I read about. Right. Let me start telling you some facts that happened and occurred in Italy. And I choose in Italy just because it's my country and I don't want to go to other experiences. I just stay at home concerning migration and migrants. Just for these 2 or 3 facts, these 2 or 3 stories, I wish to offer you some small reflection concerning rights, law, opportunity, and culture. But first of all, let's just stay to the matter of facts. Right, as you probably know, Italy is just the closer member of the European Union, if we do accept Malta, from the North Africa. So many boats rise Sicily, Puglia, and Calabria. What was the answer of the governments in Italy? From the left to the right, 3 different governments, the same answer. We just hope to open the lands to everybody, even when we say no. And all of those who just rise the seaside in Italy are driven in some fields where they can be hosted. Who does manage these hosting fields? Could be hotels, could be former military camps, could be charities, could be Red Cross. But the interesting and very unknown thing is that any of these organizations is supposed to receive before €35 per day for each host. Then the amount has been reduced to 27, then to 21. For this amount, the hosting organization is supposed to provide 2 hot meals, a clean bed with changing of blanket each week, €2 per day for smoking and this sort of stuff, tickets for buses and public transportation, and a mobile phone, a new mobile phone with a card for international calling? Well, to tell you the truth, all these organizations participate, and the government has to rule that in a sort of auction. How many organizations want to participate, and an auction who offers more services for the 35, 27 or 21 euros per day per person. Nevertheless, there was so many organizations, from the Catholic Church to the Red Cross to the social and anarchics, even the social anarchics committees that host all these people. These people are hosted. They cannot be convinced anymore. They could be people that wait for identification, such as people who are not waiting for identification. And if they move abroad or in another country, they can do. Why? Because the European Court of Human Rights says that no unnecessary, and this is a quite difficult word, not unnecessary administration identification procedure, unnecessary identification administrative procedures can convict a person in a camp or even in a country. The public opinion has been astonished a couple of years ago, end of 2018, beginning of 2019, when the newspaper said that the Red Cross, that is considered a very developed region, the Red Cross
We are having a problem to hear you, Mr. Fracanzani. Your internet connection, I believe, is... I think we lost...
I think we lost him, yes.
Yes. Mr. Fracanzani, we cannot hear you well. Maybe you can disconnect and connect again. Mr. Klauczek, maybe you can mute Mr. Fracanzani, and then he will realize that.
And if we send him a message,
yes,
written, so that he can read.
Maybe you can do it so we can continue with the panel, and when he comes again, we will give me a floor. Then I will give a floor to Mr. Asfa-Wossen Asserate to address the audience and give his view on this particular topic. Please, the floor is yours. You just have to unmute yourself, yes.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Ladic, Mrs. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. It's quite a pleasure for me to be here with you today at Pan-European Council. And my statement will be on Europe and the challenges of African migration, which undoubtedly is going to be of overwhelming importance for the future relationship between those two continents. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, the world is out of joint. 70 million people are on the run. Bloody conflicts and the fear of persecution have driven them from their homelands. According to a report issued by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, in the summer of 2020, this affects every 113th person on earth. And with every day that passes, another 34,000 people who fear for their lives leave their homes at a rate of 24 per minute. A comparison with preceding years shows how dramatic the situation has become. In 2010, the corresponding figure was just 10,900 refugees per day, but by 212, this had already risen to 21,400. And there is nothing to indicate that the numbers will decline. Quite the contrary. Some 12.4 million people were added to the figure in 2015 alone. For the most part, those affected are children and young people. Over half of the refugees are under the age of 18. As I said, currently there are some 70 million refugees throughout the world, roughly the equivalent of the entire population of France. If all the refugees were brought together in a single country, it would rank in the 21st place among the world's most populous nations. However, ladies and gentlemen, we must not forget one very important factor. Not all refugees have left their homelands. At the end of 2015, almost 2/3, or around 40.8 million, were still living within the borders of their home country, while 21.3 million had sought refuge in a foreign country. A further 3.2 million were waiting in foreign countries for their asylum application to be decided. The dreadful scenes of the civil wars in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq have dominated international headlines in recent months and years. But the refugee crisis has long ceased to be confined to the Near East. On the 2015 list of countries from which the most refugees were coming, ranking in the 3rd place after Syria and Afghanistan was an African country, Somalia. In the whole of Africa, according to the UNHCR, some 5 million people are now on the run, 20% more than the year before. Ladies and gentlemen, surely, what are the reasons for migration? I feel that the greatest test for Africa will be whether and how it can begin to rein in its rapid growth in population. There are currently around 1.3 billion Africans. This number will change by the year 2050, where the entire population of Africa will have been
We just lost your video, but
we are losing our speakers.
But I believe that we can hear you, so yeah.
Now he's back.
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Am I in?
Yes, yes, you are. We hear you. Do you hear us? Mm-hmm. We can hear you, and also see you.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, you have some. You shared also your screen. Maybe Mr. Klauchen can undo it.
Yes, I will. I don't know how this is. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Good. I'm so sorry. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what makes people leave their country, their friends, and their families? One crucial factor is the unfair trade in this world. Ladies and gentlemen, Agenda 2030 is driven, as it clearly announces, by a spirit of new global partnership. An integral part of this is a commitment to fair trade. As stated in paragraph 30 of the declaration, which I cite, states are strongly urged to refrain from promulgating and applying any unilateral economic, financial, or trade measures not in accordance with international law and the Charter of the UN that impede the full achievement of economic and social development, particularly in developing countries. This statement puts the finger on a glaring problem. For the one topic above all that the EU is desperate not to discuss, where the question of Africa and migration is concerned, is the scandalous agricultural and trade policies it conducts in order to cement global inequality firmly in place. Year on year, export-orientated European agribusiness is supported by EU subsidies running into the billions of euros. More than 40% of the EU's total budget is devoted to farming subvention. In 2019 alone, this amounted to over 40 billion in direct payments. On top of this, there are also extensive export bonuses. This leads to a situation where European agribusiness floods developing countries with exceptionally cheap produce. Chicken is a prime example of this practice. Because large quantities of chicken thighs are unsaleable in Europe, where the greatest demand is for breast meat, producers have found new consumers on the neighboring continent. There, Europe's unwanted poultry is dumped on the market at such low prices that African farmers find it impossible to compete. In 2019, the cost of producing 1 kilo of chicken meat in West Africa, which has been especially severely affected by EU exports, was 1.80 euros. But European poultry, which was going on the market there, was less than half of the price. In spite of many years of criticism leveled at this unscrupulous practice, poultry export from the EU to Africa nearly tripled between 2009 and 2019, increasing from 200,000 to almost 600,000 tons. Ladies and gentlemen, in Ghana, importers of tomato puree from the EU have brought about the decline of indigenous tomato production. The huge influx of cheap tomato paste, chiefly from southern Italy, has put thousands of Ghanaian farmers out of business. They can no longer sell their produce, while in local markets, tomato puree cans from dozens of different brands, all labeled made in Italy, can be seen stacked in pyramids as tall as a man. Next to them, one can find breakfast cereals from Germany, tinned meat from Great Britain, and milk powder from Denmark. European food manufacturers ship their subsidized goods to Africa by the ton, thereby squeezing homegrown products out of the market. For example, Ghana annually imports some 50,000 tons of tomato puree from Italy. Ladies and gentlemen, the trading policy of the EU has in the meantime been responsible for driving many former small farmers from Ghana to immigrate from their homeland. A large number of them have pitched up in Europe, some 46,000 of them in Italy alone. It is not without a certain bitter irony that many of them eke out a living there as low-paid agricultural laborers. In Apulia, which is home to vast tomato plantations, there is a rundown settlement near the town of Cerignola that is known as Ghetto Ghanese, the Ghanaian ghetto. During the harvesting season in the summer and autumn, the population of this shanty town swells to about 8,000. Over 100,000 foreign pickers are employed in southern Italy alone. A large proportion of them are from Africa. Many have no papers and have been characterized as Italy's new slaves. In return for a substance wage, they harvest the red gold, which then goes on to be exported to their home countries. A small cogs in the machine, they help maintain the very same system that caused them to lose their livelihoods at home and forced them to become economic migrants in the first place. Now, what other causes are there? All the while, the threat of climate change is only deepening existing inequalities. In comparison with the period before industrialization, the average global temperature has already risen by 0.9 degrees Celsius. The effects of climate change have already been felt across the Southern Hemisphere in the form of droughts, water shortages, hurricanes, and erratic monsoon rains. The desert is expanding throughout the Sahel region. And this is just the beginning. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, points in its fifth assessment report to the global dangers of this phenomenon. I would like to cite from it. Since average temperatures around the globe by 2050 will rise by an estimated 2 to 4 degrees, there will, if all other conditions stay the same, be a potential in future for great changes in global patterns of interpersonal violence, intercommunal conflict, and social instability. Particularly in Africa, climate change threatens to fuel existing conflicts. In his 2008 book, Climate Wars, the Canadian journalist Gwyn Dyer paints an apocalyptic picture of a world affected by accelerating climate change. In Dyer's views, the wars of the future will be sparked by climate. In climate. He predicts a huge increase in the number of refugees from the Southern Hemisphere, people who have been starved out by drought or forced to leave their homes by rising sea levels are trying to make it to the north. On the other side are those countries that can still produce enough food because they are located at higher latitudes and which fight tooth and nail to keep out the tide of refugees who are demanding their share. It need not come to this if the international community resolves to take drastic measures against global warming. Yet it is also the case that, however great an effort we make now, we can no longer do anything to influence the temperature pattern over the next 20 to 30 years. What are Africa's greatest problems? Yes, the destabilizing effect of climate change can already be felt in various regions of Africa, for instance, in Sudan and northern Nigeria. There, soil degradation has forced thousands of farmers and livestock herders to leave their village. this has been a contributory factor in the spread of the Islamist terrorist militia Boko Haram throughout the north of Nigeria. Similarly, rises in the price of wheat and the resultant tripling of the cost of bread in Egypt helped fuel protests against the regime of President Hosni Mubarak during the Arab Spring of 2010. However, as far as I am concerned, Africa's greatest burdens are the corrupt regimes and elites. Africa is poor. This statement still holds true in 2021. Wars and other armed conflicts, diseases like AIDS and malaria, land grabbing and climate changes are the heavy burdens weighing down on our African continent. But Africa is not poor because people there don't want to work hard. One of the main reasons for Africa's poverty is its governments and its elites. These have become the greatest imposition on Africa. Many of its rulers follow the example of the West and parade their wealth for all to see. They have no concern for the best interest of their people. The political elites in most African countries profit from the status quo and are not interested in effecting change. This is clearly in evidence in those countries that are particularly well endowed with the mineral resources and oil. Nigeria, for example. The largest oil fields in the whole of Africa were discovered in the 1950s in the Niger Delta. Foreign oil companies built enormous drilling installations, and before long, petrodollars in their millions were flowing into Nigeria. The giant petroleum multinationals had no concern for environmental protection or the welfare of the local communities. Over the last 40 years, Nigeria has earned more than 400 billion. Europe, ladies and gentlemen, will not be able to isolate itself without losing face. It must mount a stout defense of its principles and aims, both in the face of those countries in its midst which no longer take these ideals seriously, and with regard to Africa. Europe must realize that a common future underpinned by democratic principles and a fair system of global trade is the only way forward. In the process, Europe must be prepared to give up a little of its prosperity. But no one should be fearful of such a prospect. Quite the contrary. If we, Africans and Europeans, stand together and meet the challenges that face us with courage and confidence, the future will be to our own great mutual benefit, culturally, in human terms, and not least economically. The only way we can achieve this common goal is if European politicians have the courage to make good governance in Africa the sine qua non of future Afro-European development cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Asserate, for this wonderful speech that you gave. You presented very important and alerting information and data in respect to African-European relations in terms of migration. And you gave a lot of interesting comments in relation also to trade policy of the European Union and how it gives consequences to migration from Africa. You also mentioned very important aspects from diverse countries in Africa and the root causes of migration and the problems that Africans are facing. So I believe that following next minutes we can go deeply in particular aspects of your address. But first of all, I would like to continue with the address of Mr. Fracanzani. I'm very sorry for interrupting your speech, but internet connection is always the problem with the webinars. So please, you can continue, Mr. Fracanzani, with your address. And thank you once again, Mr. Asserate, for the introductory remarks.
I do thank you once more, and I do apologize if something wrong from me. To tell you the truth, we are so agree with His Highest Asfa-Wossen that what he said it was exactly the following of my speech, and it's exactly what I written in this book. The title is "The Identity: Fundamental Rights Between European Courts and Public Administration," and under the auspice of Observatorium Against the Agromafia. So we didn't talk each other, neither in German, a language we love, both of us love, but we were agree without knowing each other. So I just continue on my paper, and so it's true because the book is written in the 2016, and the second part of my speech was just that. So from one hand, many organizations earn money from the government and from the European Union, who gave to the Italian government to spread of this organization from the links, anarchics, to the right and between the Red Cross to host people giving. Second step, if somebody from good people, even friends of mine, we got agriculture, say, can you send me that I host regularly, and I help them to work? The trade unions say no, because they have to stay here. Doing what? Nothing. But on the other hand, we have what's happened in the south, deeply in the south, in the Apulia, where unluckily the agriculture economy is based on this deep new form of slave. So we have on one hand the European Union that gave money to the government to host these people, but the European Court of Human Rights say you don't have to do work and put them into the job market. And so on the other hand, a dark side that involve these people and without any social insurance and no nothing, sometimes happen terrific auto accidents, where sometimes even people die. We had one with 9 people died last summer. So what's the conclusion of my speech? On one hand, we consider migrants people and human beings. But on the other hand, they are goods. And this came out very quickly when, with the COVID-19, the amount given by the government to host the migrants was not enough for COVID-safe hostings. 35, 27, 21 euro per day is not enough for a COVID-free hostings. What's happened? Well, this business was not anymore interesting for all these associations. And that means from the very strong left to the not very strong right, but more or less all of them. And that's put all these people or going to the north, those who can, or stay there, new slave. in this sort of very dangerous globalized economy in which the property of the tomato soup is now British, but not even British because it's a Luxembourg fund. A Luxembourg fund developed by the Apollo fund in America. Apollo, you know, it's one of the biggest investment fund in the world. They were running 300 billions per year. What can we do? Just 2 more minutes. We don't have enough time to develop this tale, but it's interesting that what is common following the Supreme Court of Human Rights and the Court of Justice of the European Union. That's not Europe, European Union. Basically, it's what is common in a continent with 27 a union with 27, 29 plus 2 minus 1 members. What is common between Germany, 80 million Germans, and 200,000 Malta, from Portugal to Estonia, from Poland to Spain? Well, not the language, even not the religion, not the history. The only thing common is the money. So only the global market merge and can bind the European Union. The most powerful general direction is the DG5, competition, because the competition make money running. And the system is not rich if it is much gold inside. It is rich when money change from one hand to another one. So basically, and that's very dangerous, the Supreme Court is following the idea of John Locke, in which you've got life, liberty, and property. Property, liberty, and life. And as you with the money, you can earn and buy the property. With money, you can buy the liberty and the life. And so there are no more fundamental life that you cannot buy. And there are no torts in which you can give money just to not to go to jail. And this perspective is common from North America, in which John Locke is at the basis of Benjamin Franklin and his construction with the 3 fundamental rights, and the European Union. So we are going to have a great market of 400 million European, 300 million of North American, and the globalized market in which no fundamental rights, no rights that we cannot buy. So everything has got a price, everything has been to change. Can we talk about identity? Not anymore, I think. At the beginning is Imperial and Royal Highness. Karl von Habsburg-Lothringen says, answering to Professor Grovevich, that talk about Paul Ricoeur, le livre Soi-même comme un autre, Soi-même comme un autre and charity. He said, yes, I take here on my paper sheet. The people can discuss. The cultural, it's a matter of fact and is based on identity. And 2 identities can talk or cannot. But if we lose the identity in this melting pot of the market, in which each day a value of a life is the price of the tomatoes, and today is 10, and tomorrow is 20. Which identity are we talking about? Which culture are we talking about? How can be a dialogue? The example in Italy is that all our charity has been lost in the same time in which the money given by the government was not enough to host, not a person, but to host and manage goods. Thanks a lot, and I do apologize once more for the inconvenience of the internet. But I just say that maybe, you see, talking and telling the truth directly, maybe the big brother sometimes can tune on it. But this is only my opinion. Thanks a lot once more.
Thank you, Mr. Fracanzani, for your address. And you don't have to apologize. These are normal situations with webinar address. And also, I would like to thank you for your perspective on the trade stakeholders on the EU level and their implications on the migration issues, as well as you mentioned also the COVID-19 circumstances as we are still living in it. And also it was very interesting to hear about relation to the EU single market and the competition, as you showed also that everything is linked and that this particular topic, intercultural dialogue, has diverse dimensions, and this is why it is very interesting to discuss it. Furthermore, we will continue with the panel, and now I would like to invite Mr. Ali Mostfa to give his remark on this particular topic. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting for this panel. I'm very happy to join my colleagues concerning this discussion on intercultural dialogue. I have structured, let's say, my talk in a sort of paper, let's say, and I give it the title Immigration and Paradigm of Minority Islam in Europe. And I would like to start with a reminder of the European reality regarding the issue of immigration. Say that the resilience and the cohesion of Europe are paradoxically conditioned by its diversity, which is rooted in its history and it is part of its destiny. And from the inception, Europe had to face the challenge of diversity and adopt methods that emphasize common heritage of a European identity. Immigration flows over the last 80 years after the Second War have impacted most European countries and have become more and more diverse. Intensifying in this way and changing the population pattern and composition, statistics and academic research show that the new social group emerged in response to new social situations. However, over the last years, through all European countries, the debate between citizenship and country of birth gives rise to contradictory discussions and policies in the member states of Europe, European Union, which, if I put this mildly, I would say they are not really convergent. This is the least we can say. So the new intercultural paradigm, distinguished from the one developed in the white paper on intercultural dialogue launched by the Council of Europe in 2008, must be thought of as a global concept to address conflictual perceptions regarding the eruption of religious references in the European public space. The entry of Islam in Europe and in the European public space has aroused heated debates, and two visions collide. The first one considers this eruption as a transgression because it threatens the European identity. And the second one considers of this proximity as a chance for Islam to develop in Western democratic zone. How shall we today enhance further the foundational elements that form stronger Europe? What is our vision of the social reality for the future. Will Europe manage its cultural, religious, and non-religious diversity on the mere basis that this plurality is to coexist loosely together with each culture ignorant of the other, which gives perhaps birth to stereotypes and prejudices? And my talk on the social and cultural issue of Islam in Europe aims to highlight the space where this encounter takes place, and tries to analyze the modalities of religious visibility and the terms of its compliance with the principles of European secularism. And I would like first to clarify some of the terms, and I refer to my talk in particular to the question or the issue of the intercultural paradigm. Intercultural paradigm, that I argue in this talk, but also in other papers, it means not only the capacity of a society to enable citizens of diverse and foreign origins to maintain together links of dialogue and intercommunication, but above all, the capacity of these societies to include citizens from immigration and other backgrounds in the debate on the functioning of institutions, public services, and social protection, which means full recognition of their citizenship. An intercultural approach based on simply intercultural communication is hardly sufficient. And the new intercultural paradigm articulates the issue of public space, and I would say public liberal space, a place where links and ties are shaped, where community affiliations are made and made visible, and the diverse Islamic customs are expressed. So the issue of public space leads to the discussion on the way it is appropriated and how this appropriation is perceived. Let's now turn to this minority in question. As I mentioned before in my talk, it concerns the Muslim minority in the European public space. And it is still necessary to underline the fact that the presence of Islam in Europe brings about major cultural innovations in terms of interpersonal encounters. The new intercultural paradigm urges us to preserve and transmit or even to develop further the foundations of our particular identities. Such respect for identities prevent any attempt to acculturation, domination, or fundamentalism. It also pushes us to deal with each other in order to highlight common values and standards. Without this in-between, any society may risk becoming divided. And unquestionably, Islam has gradually become an increasingly visible presence in Europe. And intellectuals not lose sight of its historical process, which they consider not as a fait accompli, but as an evolutionary process. As far as I'm concerned with this question of Islam in Europe, I would say that the eruption of Islam in Europe had just gone through 4 periods, which I try, let's say, to expose them very quickly. Now, the first period for me, it goes from the 1950s to the 1970s, which is also the heritage of flows of immigration. But I describe this moment and this period as what we call the silent presence of Islam, because most of the Muslims at that time were perceived in relation to their cultures. They were silent because they were perhaps also put in some neighborhoods and mainly invisible, okay, most of the time. And even take an example, for example, even for the month of Ramadan, seemed at that time to be perceived as a sort of a celebration and even festivity rather than a month of religious observance, completely different from the perception we have, let's say, some 40 years after. The second period, from the mid-70s onward, it corresponds to the period when the number of Muslims in Europe grew in parallel with the desire to develop some kind of infrastructure, including places of religious community life for the younger generation. And here again, European countries react differently to these requests and to this demand. And we have, for example, the 1970s, 1973, 1974, for example, in France, the creation and also the setting up of Quranic schools. It bothers nobody, no reactions at all in the 70s, till 1975, for example. And these activities were made possible in Europe thanks to the great autonomy and responsibility of each Muslim, because as you know, Islam is not structured in a vertical way. It is much more horizontal, so any community can organize itself in the way it wants. But this period is very interesting for me because at that time, for example, foreign countries, and mainly countries from Africa, countries from the Maghreb, for example, Arab countries, did at that time instrumentalize also the Muslims in Europe, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Morocco, Algeria, Pakistan, and the list is very long. All developed, for example, global strategies involving Europe and the immigrant population living there. Turkey, for example, has sought through different agencies, for example, to have control of Turkish mosques in Europe. And we have this, let's say, interpenetration of the European immigration from Islam background and the other countries really fundamentally present in the time of them, and no reaction at that time. On the contrary, in France, for example, we have the French government inviting, for example, Morocco, Algeria, and even to some extent, for example, Turkey, to have, let's say, also control of this religious field. It was a dismissal at all from the government at that time concerning this question. But look at how this period paved the way and prepared the third period, which is, for me, it goes from the 1980s to the 1990s. Crucial period in Europe, crucial period. From the mid-1980s, Muslim population, both religious and not religious, because not all of them are practical, let's say, received a great deal of attention from the media, which has associated them with the event in Iran, 1979, the revolution. It associated them also to the cruise Achille Lauro, hijacked by the members of Palestinian Liberation Front in 1985, which was a founding event that perhaps marked the beginning of a confusion and association between immigrant Islam, terrorism, the Rushdie affair of 1982, which brought also Islam and Muslims to the forefront of the scene, the 1989 dispute arising the wearing of the scarf in schools in France, which ended up strongly associating the issue of immigration and its visibility in the European public space, particularly in France, as being threatening and dangerous. But the fourth period refers to the time when Muslims assert themselves and assert also their the Islamic expression in the European public space significantly, I would say. And the process of establishment of these Muslims raises also questions why Islamic expression in European public space have grown, as I said, very strongly. This period extends to the event of September 2001. And after 2001, a large-scale political demand dressed up the Islamic project, Islam being articulated to a political project, a period of high tensions that requires great attention as a galaxy of political, religious movements were born and creating confusion in the minds of European citizens in general. In this last period, I would say, Islam has become less and less a religion of immigrants. Muslims are themselves Europeans, French, Spaniards, because they were born in Europe, and now they consider themselves as being permanently settled in Europe. Some of them, I would say, they have practically no contact with the countries of their parents, and they are now seeking to be considered full citizens, regardless of the complexity of their identity and its position. Islam in Europe expresses itself outside the cultures after 2001, cultures of origin, I would say, and in relation to a dominant culture with which there is a process of conflict or opposition. The process of deculturation is generally presented as an identity crisis, leading sometimes to the integration, where the original identity is both weakened and recomposed. So we have this period of this identity recomposition, or an identity which is also somehow altered. We have in France the Institute, Montaigne Institute, which is a think tank institute, published a very interesting, pioneering, I would say, and potentially controversial survey on Muslims in 2016, entitled "Un Islam français est possible," an Islam of France is possible, which was reported in Le Journal du Dimanche, and it was in 2016. And it said, faith-based Muslims share a higher level of religious practice than the rest of the population. Although 30% never go to the mosque, 31 of them, they go at least once a week. And the practice of prayer is even more frequent. Half of those who only go to a place of worship during Ramadan observe the 5 daily prayers, as well as 45% of those who go less often. So the conclusion of this is that we have a higher, let's say, rate of this third generation or second generation from immigrants who are really very observant of their religion, or the religion of their fathers and grandfathers. What does it show? Well, if we assume the fact that anything that the liberal public space does not assimilate, it becomes automatically antithesis and is positioned as outside history, well, Islam is becoming one of these elements which is considered as being outside history. And much more than this, it is an antithesis to this liberal space or European space. Today, European modernity is also experiencing an important turning point, which involves an increased interaction between religiosity, visibility, and urban public space. And this interaction can no longer be managed only with this so-called intercultural policies or just an intercultural dialogue. The new intercultural paradigm must take into account the challenge of the liberal public space, which is more and more overwhelming in all European countries. It is a place of visibility, but is also a place of counter-discourse and a place of action. And this is what we are witnessing today. These are the perspectives that we have and we will have to address for the next 30 or 40 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mostfa, for your insightful thoughts, especially in terms of the implication of a religious discourse, and most notably in terms of Islam, and in relation with migration issues on the mostly European soil. Thank you once again, and I believe that with this we have finished the first introductory part of the panelists, and we can dive into discussion. So I invite all other participants to pose the questions in Q&A section or chat. You will have also more time to do it, as I plan to pose my questions to panelists, and also to give a space to panelists to discuss among themselves if they have any comments on the address of other panelists. Maybe some of you have, or we can continue. Maybe Mr. Fracanzani or Mr. Asserate. No, you don't have. Okay. Then I will have my first question, and I will pose it to Mr. Asserate. It deals with the issue that you mentioned, that we have witnessed from year to year, a rise in the number of migrants coming from Africa. And this is one alerting data. And I would like to see your opinion on Cotonou agreement that lasted from 2000 until December 2020. And how do you see it, the relation between EU and Africa? It deals with a variety of topics, but one of the topics is also migration issue. And how do you see the perspective of this agreement, as it was announced that in 2021 there shall be an EU-Africa summit that will deal with the continuation of this agreement in terms of one comprehensive partnership that will also tackle the issue of migration. So I would like to hear your opinion.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mrs. Tadic. I think this is a very important point. The Cotonou Agreement made Africa, what many Europeans don't even know, that the African countries, all of the African countries, or the African Caribbean countries, are associated members of the EU through the Cotonou Agreement. Now that that has stopped, I feel a little bit afraid, because Europe actually wants bilateral agreements with every African state. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a no-go. It would be just like a football match between Real Madrid and the school team of Addis Ababa. We are not on the same level. So I sincerely hope that there will be a continuation of the Cotonou Agreement, where Africans will still maintain a few privileges arising from their associated membership.
Thank you for your answer. I will have one question in the chat from Mr. Klaus Valentin to, I suppose, to Mr. Mostfa, who mentioned about liberal public space. So he would like to know what shall be the pillars of that global European liberal public space. And I will just add my continuation of my question to this particular, also in the respect of the rise in the previous years of terrorism, of nationalism, and all the views which prevent the proper tackling of the question of migration, especially in terms when we look about Muslim migrants, who are a very vast number of them coming to Europe. So how do you see that these problems will be an obstacle to the creation of this global, maybe European liberal public space? Just unmute, yes, thank you.
No, let's just say concerning this liberal public space, because I think this is the first time I am very interested, let's say, in this question of the immigration and public space in general in Europe, because we perhaps don't share the same principles from different backgrounds. Because if we define, for example, the public space in Arab countries, not defining the same principles as the public space we have, for example, in Europe. Anyway, but the liberal public space is a place of conformity. It is an individualized place in which the community fact may be perceived as being fattening, knowing that this question of community, which is at the heart of Islamic conception of, in terms of interrelations with the other, Islam is also based on this fact, the idea of community or communitarian, let's say. So the idea of being, let's say, in community in order, let's say, to live one's faith, it goes in opposition with the conception we have of this public space in Europe. So maybe also this is also some of the things that we need to deal with in terms of anthropologically speaking and pedagogically, let's say, we need to explain also to the Europeans how someone, for example, is from another culture, maybe, let's say, moving, being visible in this space, which could be somehow practically different. The idea of visibility, for example, it is something which is inherent to this question of community. So we live our faith by perhaps showing it and living it in interconnection with the other. So as for the question of, let's say, you've been asking concerning, let's say, terrorism and things like this. So this is perhaps another register, which is I distinguish between criminal actions in the name of Islam or in the name, for example, of religion, and radicalization in general, and the idea of Islam, which could be perhaps also, even if it is practiced in an extreme way. So here we have this amalgamation. Some Muslims could be perhaps practicing their Islam in the most extreme way, extreme between quotation marks, because they practice, for example, five times a day, doing the Ramadan, for example, and things like this, and even showing on their own clothes and altar expressions. But at the same time, these remains practices in a sense. And then we have something else which is completely different, is this criminal actions which some of the factions are living in the name, of course, of Islam, but we need to perceive them as being terrorism act, and that's all. It is the same question as we had, for example, in Northern Ireland at the time of the Trouble, for example. It would not reasonably to confuse these actions as being Catholic on one side or Anglican on the other side. These were political actions. I'm not saying that these actions could be political, but it's also very somehow very complex. But we need to distinguish them from any religious or Islamic motivation.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. We had also a question in the Q&A section for panelists that were dealing with the management and financing of the regions that accept migrants. That was the also address of Mr. Fracanzani, and the Mr. Osuma, who posed this question, said that Mr. Fracanzani has well answered it. But I will continue in that section, and I will pose question also to Mr. Fracanzani in terms that Italy is the country that was mostly hit by migrant crisis, and it is still accepting a lot of migrants, as it is the country the first on the Mediterranean Sea and the most logical choice of migrants to enter the European soil. So I would like to ask you, do you see migration policy of Italy and stance in some particular nationalist discourses in accordance with the European migration policy in this particular respect? And do you see that migrants could be good, as Germany sees it, for economy, but most notably in this cultural aspect? How do you see it?
Thank you very much for this question. I answer in 3 steps. First, there is not an Italian policy. There is the European policy. And the Italian policy is to accept anyone, as the European policies accept anyone giving money. Already the government from the right and sovereignty bite this subject, but they didn't change the official acts. You don't have to read the newspaper, you just have to check the official acts of the government. Even when there was a government from the right, all the same politic of incomes, absolutely. So many people, so many migrants can rise Italy, proportionally balanced in how much money the European Union gave to Italy. So this is the first. Second, European Union, I'm very lucky because I've got many pupils of mine, former pupils that become functionary in the European Union. And so I can ask and have lots of data officially, but already checking the best of them. And there have been spent 24 billions of euro just in this sort of charity, not in improving these people. So can you consider how much money is that if they can use to help the countries there? Because I'm sure that no one of these migrants want to afford the sea, stay in Apulia or other regions, very cold, forgetting the tradition, forgetting their identity, unable to tell the old fairy tales to their sons and daughters round the fire, cooking their properly meal and come in Europe. They have moved because the political instability push here, and already the economic globalization does what is said. So money has been involved here as charity instead to be put there to stabilize those regions. Third, the pact is the migrants can stay here, but without properly papers and social status. So they can't be, except a minority, employee in agriculture or factories legally. They have just to stay. And so for so many people, they have just to stay. You see, criminality, criminal association, entrepreneurs that are not legal, the sort of foggy situation, just fish from that and use them in such a way we wouldn't have seen once more. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have one raised hand from Mr. Hans-Martin Windig-Greitz. Maybe Mr. Klaucher, you can, yes, allow him to speak. Yes, Mr. Greitz, maybe you can address if you would like to say something. You just have to unmute yourself.
Sie können das Mikrofon einschalten, wenn Sie was fragen wollen. Maybe it was a mistake when he raised his hand. Maybe, okay, we can continue. We have one more question also in the Q&A section that is directed to Professor Ali Mostfa, which goes like this. Religion serves as an identity in cultural circle, but how can religious solidarity tackle problem of survival without causing chaos in European Union on migration?
This is not a very easy question to answer, because we have here sort of an equation between two things, but perhaps it comes back again to the explanation something given before, and also maybe this opposition between two types of appropriating the space. So we have, for example, the one that results from a sort of a union and a transformation that tends towards communion. This is one type of appropriation of the space, and the other that results from fragmentation of interests, antis, individualism, and even an extreme secularism. So these are, let's say, the way we appropriate this European public space. So the first one, for example, is also a process of identification with the religious culture, because we need to stress something here is that it is a religious culture, because not all of them, these people are, I would say, keen on practicing, for example, the principle. This is just a way for them to live this communion in order to prevent themselves from the fragmentation and the process of antis that characterize, or at least in their perception, it's characterized this public space. So the tension for me, it is at the heart of this, the way each tradition, Muslims mainly, for example, they try to show their action through this visibility in the public space. So after all, they are just, I would say, also in the sense that transposing the same mechanisms that we can find, for example, in Arab Muslim countries. They live in this way, so we transpose this in the public European space. And hence, I would say the perception has been threatening and maybe also being a sort of an antithesis to the space that Europe has been developing over the last years.
Thank you. I see that there are no more questions from the other participants. Maybe I will give 1 or 2 seconds if anything else comes up. But I believe that there is no more question. So then I will go to the conclusion of this panel. I believe that we had a very interesting discussion. We tackled a variety of topics that are very sensitive. So I will just give 1 to 2 minutes to each panelist to give just final remarks, final thoughts. How would you like to conclude this panel, and what messages, recommendations would you like to send in terms of this particular topic? So maybe Mr. Asserate, as you were first panelist, maybe you can start.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tadic. Well, my greatest hope is that the question one day will be answered, where our European partners will ask the question, who are the greatest exporters of migrants in this world? And the answer to that must be African dictators who do not allow their own people to lead a sensible life, a moderate life in their own countries. And I'm afraid until we are able to change the entire face of Africa by completely putting these dictators aside from the point of view of making pariahs out of African dictators, we are not going to go ahead. Do you realize that around $6 billion have gone into Africa in the past 60 years in aid, in different sorts of aid? Unfortunately, it is deemed that about 4.8 billion has come back to Europe and the Western world in form of palaces on the Loire, in form of incredible houses in London and Paris, and in form of great bank accounts in Switzerland. The great economic Nobel Prize winner, Angus Deaton, tells us that not even 1/3 of the development aid that has gone to Africa in the past 60 years has actually reached the right target. And I sincerely hope these are the changes that are going to take place in the future, where Europe will have an African policy that is not built upon what is called realpolitik. What does realpolitik actually mean to us Africans? It means you can be the greatest coward, the most terrible president in the world. As long as you are in power, we European Democrats will come crawling on our knees to worship you, and God help you if you are no longer in power. If this is going to be the case, nothing is going to change, and I can assure you the number of migrants will come flooding to Europe.
Thank you for your message and for your thoughts that are very important to be heard by those who decide. I hope that will be passed to those who decide and that these particular issues will be tackled. Mr. Fracanzani, do you have any final remarks?
My final remarks could say this one. Culture and identity means quality. Money and market means quantity. if we keep on reasoning on quantity, the strongest, the powerful is always right. We have to change and do not keep on reasoning on quantity, because on quantity there is no dialogue, but just rescue the identity. That means the culture, that means the history, that means those values that never forget. Because Merlin, the sorceress, warned King Arthur in the Breton material, saying the damnation of the human beings is that they forget. We don't have to forget, otherwise we are damned. Thank you.
Thank you for your final remarks and to reminding us that we have to come to our sense when it comes to materialistic way of life and to a little bit more cherish the values that we have as a human beings and especially as a Europe and European Union. And finally, Mr. Mostfa, do you have something also to add?
I would say, I would be very short saying that I think we need, perhaps in the light of this the epoch we are living in, we need to go back again to the definition and the definitions we have been given so far to this intercultural dialogue and communication and things like that. We need to, I mean, these definitions, it seems to me that are no longer fitting into the epoch in which we are living today. We need to have a definition that perhaps also pushes people to move beyond narrow views and fundamentalism on every side, and to give perhaps a positive dialogue between different cultures. Something else I need perhaps to stress here is also, which is not in my paper, is to relaunch again with insistence the Euro-Mediterranean partnership and discussion and communication. But this is something which could be very factual, been launched some years ago, but it didn't receive, I would say, the necessary support from politicians. And maybe there is a chance here, maybe, to show another bridge, perhaps built differently from what we used to have in the past in 1995, much more, let's say, recipient to the requests from both sides of the Mediterranean. So maybe this could be a way to frame these flows of immigrants coming from the south into Europe. Maybe.
Thank you for your messages and for your recommendations. And I believe with this thought that in the future that we will be able to understand a little bit more the other, and that we will be able to really create and sustain and nourish intercultural dialogue and to cherish our richness of culture in the European soil. I will conclude this panel, and I would just like to thank you all. It was my pleasure to moderate this event, this panel, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to meet you even virtually. Mr. Klauček, I hand over the last words in this webinar.
The last words for this day. No, not the last words for this day. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to you, Teodora, that you took over the moderation, although it was a very short time and only one day ago that I asked you. You did, as always, a sovereign job. Thanks a lot. Thanks to the panelists, Professor Fracanzani, Professor Mostfa, Johannes. I like it very much because you had very clear words, and I think we need clear words, because only on clear words we can build a real dialogue so that we understand each other. Tomorrow we proceed with our conference at 9 or 9:15 with a so-called policy lab. Asfa-Wossen Asserate will also give us some kind of introductory remarks tomorrow, together with I think you mentioned that Asfa-Wossen Asserate is the chairman of the board of Pactum Africanum, and the chairman of the curatorium is Karl von Habsburg. So tomorrow we will have a nomination by Pactum Africanum in the morning with introductory remarks, and then we go into a discussion where we have Philip Jawanek from Paneuropa Youth of Austria with two friends who will give us some kind of insight in how the policy making process in the European Union works, and Dejan will have the job to moderate that. So see you tomorrow at 9. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.